Usually, when we think of a major philosophical shift in society, we picture these, I don't know, quiet lecture halls.
Right, yeah. Thick, dusty academic journals.
Exactly. Maybe a few professors debating in a room that's just completely disconnected from the public eye. But I want you to transport yourself back, say, 15 to 20 years ago.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, think about what was dominating the tables right at the front of every major bookstore. Or, think about what was taking over those early, grainy YouTube clips and primetime television debates.
It was inescapable.
It really was. If
Oh,
you were walking through a bookstore in, 2006, you just couldn't avoid these covers. It wasn't just pop culture or politics. It was this massive, sudden cultural storm driven by a group of highly visible intellectuals that the media dubbed the New Atheists.
It was an unavoidable cultural phenomenon, for sure. And our mission for this deep dive today is to really unpack the fascinating intellectual history of that movement.
Which is quite a story.
Oh, definitely. We're looking at its meteoric rise, its eventual fracturing, and most importantly, the profound philosophical clash underneath it all. We are basically looking at two fundamentally different ways of viewing human thought. The conflict model of science and religion versus what's called the cooperation model.
Right. And I think we need to do a quick impartiality check here for you, the listener, because whether you bought every one of those bestsellers back in the day or, you wanted to throw them out the window, that isn't really what we're looking at today.
No, not at all.
We are putting on our intellectual historian hats. Our goal here isn't to take a side or to endorse either the atheistic or the religious viewpoints. We are simply unpacking the actual architecture of this debate. We're looking at how these incredibly influential arguments were built and how they're being critiqued by the source material we're diving into today.
Exactly. We are dissecting the engine of a cultural moment. Because looking back at the early 2000s, Anglo-American popular culture was just profoundly shaped by a very specific, very vocal group of thinkers.
Right. It wasn't just one guy.
No, you had intellectuals like A.C. Grayling, who became widely known largely through his, well, highly publicized and rather aggressive public debates.
Oh, yeah, the debate circuit was huge.
And there's Michael Shermer, who massively expanded his reach and the reach of this whole movement, really through his publication, Skeptic Magazine.
But within that broader sphere, there was a core group, right? I mean, the ones who really dominated the zeitgeist.
There was. Four primary figures truly dominated the cultural landscape: Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens.
The big four.
Right. Their impact was so striking and their rhetoric was so intense that they actually earned this highly dramatic, almost theatrical label from the media. They were called the Four Horsemen of Religion's anticipated apocalypse.
The Four Horsemen. I mean, you don't get a nickname like that for just politely disagreeing with people at a cocktail party.
No, you certainly don't.
Did they come with matching capes? It just shows how theatrical the whole media environment was. And looking at the timeline we have from the source, it's wild how rapid this all was.
It was incredibly fast.
It really kicks off with Sam Harris publishing The End of Faith in 2004. Then, just 2 years later, in 2006, you get a double hit. Richard Dawkins releases The God Delusion, and Daniel Dennett publishes Breaking the Spell.
Right, back to back.
Yeah, and then right on their heels in 2007, Christopher Hitchens drops God Is Not Great. I mean, that is a massive concentration of best-selling philosophy hitting the public in just a 3-year window.
It was a relentless publishing schedule.
Yeah.
It completely flooded the intellectual marketplace.
Yeah.
But what's crucial to understand here is what actually made them new.
Right, why the New Atheists.
Exactly. Because earlier skeptics had always existed in Western thought.
Yeah.
But they generally contented themselves with criticizing religion intellectually,
Right.
writing it off as irrational, but treating it mostly as a private matter.
Like a personal belief?
Yeah. But this new group fundamentally shifted the goalposts. They didn't just say religion was irrational, they argued that it could no longer be socially tolerated.
Let me make sure I'm capturing that distinction, because I think it's important. If I'm using an analogy, it sounds like the difference between being a passive disbeliever at a dinner party, someone who just quietly thinks the host's political views are ridiculous, but, eats the chicken anyway.
Right.
Versus being an active protester who kicks in the door, flips the table, and demands the dinner party be shut down entirely.
That is a very apt way to frame it. They argued that religion had to be openly mocked in public. It was seen as dangerous and had to be actively resisted in every single sphere of public influence.
Wow.
Yeah, it wasn't a private intellectual disagreement. It was a call to public cultural resistance.
But despite that massive initial momentum, they aren't like dominating the bestseller lists today. I mean, the
Yeah.
movement eventually faded, right?
It did. Part of the decline was simply, the unavoidable passage of time and mortality. Hitchens passed away in 2011. Dennett very recently passed in 2024,
Oh, right.
leaving just Dawkins, who is in his 80s now, and Harris as the remaining highly active members. But it wasn't just age that ended the movement.
Right. The source talks about a specific internal fracturing.
Yeah, social commentators were already declaring new atheism dead by the mid-2010s. Public interest really plummeted after around 2014. The movement fractured internally over, identity politics and broader culture war issues.
Which happens to a lot of movements, I guess.
Exactly. And that internal division ended up heavily alienating many politically progressive atheists who had previously been the bedrock of their audience. They essentially splintered into different political camps and lost that unified voice.
So the unified movement collapsed, but the ideas certainly didn't vanish. I mean, the way we talk about science and faith online today is still heavily colored by them.
Oh, absolutely, the legacy remains.
So if we want to understand why they blew up in the first place, we really have to look at the underlying philosophical assumption that they popularized, this conflict model.
Yes. This is the absolute core of our deep dive. The entire message of the Four Horsemen rested on a widely held but rarely questioned assumption.
Okay, what is it?
The assumption is that experimental science and religion are inherently incompatible social institutions. They are locked in this unavoidable perpetual antagonism.
Perpetual fight.
Right. And Sam Harris really hammers this point home in the source text. In his book, Letter to a Christian Nation, he argues that religious claims are intrinsically in conflict with scientific claims because, in his view, religious claims rely on terrible evidence.
So it's an evidence issue for him.
Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
He sets it up as a pure zero-sum game. The success of science comes at the expense of religious dogma, and maintaining religious dogma always comes at the expense of science.
Right, and Dawkins says something similar, doesn't he?
He does. In The God Delusion, Dawkins argues that when the demise of God leaves a gap in society, he fills it with what he calls a good dose of science. And he defines that as the honest and systematic endeavor to find out the truth about the real world.
Okay, I have to say, I'm struggling with that binary framing. It's like if human cognition works like a seesaw, where the science side going up means the religion side must logically hit the dirt, that leaves absolutely no room for nuance.
None whatsoever.
But is human cognition really that black and white?
Well, according to the framework the new atheists were using, yes.
Hmm.
The source material synthesizes this really well. For these thinkers, science and religion were actually merely proxies.
Proxies for what?
They were stand-ins for the true adversaries, the real concepts locked in combat, reason and faith. They view this as a strict, zero-sum game of human cognition. Either you have good reasons for a belief, or you don't.
Reason and faith. Okay, let's look at how they define this, because this leads right into their specific indictment of faith as an intellectual danger.
Yes, the stakes get much higher here.
Right, because they didn't just think faith was like a silly fairy tale. They thought it was an active threat to society.
They viewed faith as a complete abdication of intellectual responsibility. Harris, again looking at Letter to a Christian Nation, complains about the state of human discourse. He argues that when you're considering the truth of a proposition, you are either engaged in an honest appraisal of the evidence and logical arguments, or you aren't.
And he claims religion is the one area of life where people imagine some other standard of intellectual integrity applies, right?
Exactly. There's a quote from him where he says that faith is nothing more than the license religious people give one another to keep believing when reasons fail.
Wow, that is a heavy indictment. He's saying faith is literally just a social permission slip to stop thinking.
Yes. He goes on to say that while believing strongly without evidence is considered a mark of madness or stupidity in any other area of our lives, faith in religion still holds immense prestige.
And Richard Dawkins takes this indictment even further, right?
He really does. He moves from a critique of adult discourse to a harsh condemnation of how we raise children.
Oh, right, the parenting aspect. Dawkins attacks the very act of rearing children in a religion. He calls the practice of teaching children that faith is a virtue pernicious.
He explicitly calls it an evil.
Right, because, in his words, it requires no justification and Brooks, no argument.
And this raises the stakes significantly. Dawkins argues that teaching children unquestioned faith primes them to become, as he puts it, lethal weapons for future jihads or crusades.
That's intense.
Very. He makes a bold sociological bet, claiming that if children were taught to question their beliefs, instead of being taught the virtue of unquestioning faith, there would be no suicide bombers.
Okay, hold on. I have to jump in here. Are they perhaps attacking a very specific, extreme version of faith here?
How so?
Well, they seem to be looking at blind, unquestioning obedience, the kind of radicalization that leads to violence, and treating that as the only definition of faith. They've defined faith entirely as the enemy of reason. Isn't that a bit of a straw man argument?
That is precisely the critique raised by the source material we are unpacking today.
Here we go.
Yeah, having laid out the new atheist's arguments fully, we now hit the paradigm shift. The counter-argument is that the new atheists operated from two fundamentally flawed premises. First, as you just pointed out, they used a heavily truncated, flawed understanding of faith.
Meaning they define religious faith strictly as belief without sufficient evidence, or like belief in willful defiance of evidence.
Exactly. And second, they operated from an uncritical, scientific view of reason.
Scientistic. Unpack that for me. You mean treating science not as a method, but as an ideology?
That's the exact distinction. Scientism is the belief that pure logical inference from empirically verifiable principles is the only path to genuine knowledge.
Oh, I see.
They framed it as if all true knowledge is built purely on that, with absolutely no room for anything else.
Right, so if you can't measure it in a beaker or prove it on a whiteboard, it's not real knowledge. So by defining faith as just blind obedience and reason as only empirical data, they essentially rigged the game to revive that tired fight model we talked about.
They did, but the counterargument from our source introduces an alternative framework. It points to what it calls the West's perennial philosophy.
The perennial philosophy, what exactly is that? It sounds a bit abstract.
It can sound abstract, yeah, but the perennial philosophy essentially refers to the long-standing intellectual tradition of Western thought, stretching back through ancient Greek philosophers up through medieval theologians.
Okay.
It's a tradition that offers careful, precise analyses of how faith, reason, and the human will actually interact. Instead of a conflict model, it offers a cooperation model.
And the core counterclaim here is a massive mind-bender. I mean, the perennial philosophy argues that the act of faith is actually harmonized with the intellect. It recognizes that every rational inference presupposes some act of faith.
This is the structural reversal that dismantles the entire new atheist framework. Think about the magnitude of this claim.
It's huge.
If the source is correct that every single rational thought you have requires a foundational act of faith, then the new atheist's entire reason versus faith dichotomy just collapses.
The war they declared is essentially friendly fire.
Precisely.
But I have to be honest, I'm struggling to see the mechanics of this. I get that trusting people requires faith, but how does pure logic require faith? For the listener, I think a good analogy to break this down is it's like sitting in a chair,
That's a good way to visualize it.
Right, because you can use all the logic in the world to deduce the chair is sturdy, you can look at the wood, you can check the screws, you can test the weight limit, but ultimately, actually sitting down requires a tiny leap of faith that it won't break.
That's a very practical example, and it applies to science, too. Let's look at the scientific method itself, which the new atheists champion. To do science, to drop an apple and formulate a theory of gravity, you have to assume that the universe is orderly and governed by consistent laws.
Okay, yeah.
You have to assume that the laws of physics will be the same tomorrow as they are today.
But hasn't that been proven by past experience? I mean, the apple has always fallen.
But assuming that the future will resemble the past is itself an unprovable assumption. You cannot use past experience to prove that past experience is a reliable guide to the future.
Oh, because that's circular logic.
Exactly. You have to take a leap of faith, an intellectual leap of trust, in the uniformity of nature. Furthermore, you have to have faith in your own cognitive faculties.
Right.
You have to trust that your brain, your senses, and your logical processing are actually giving you an accurate representation of reality, rather than, say, hallucinating or being deceived. You cannot scientifically prove that your reason is reliable without using your reason to do it.
That is a phenomenal point. So the logic itself relies on an underlying trust. You can use all the logic in the world, but ultimately, applying that logic to reality requires a foundational, unavoidable leap of faith that the universe makes sense.
Yes, your foundational faith in reality is what allows reason to operate in the first place. They are not enemies locked in a zero-sum game. They are inseparable. And by recognizing this, the hidden assumptions behind the new atheist concepts are exposed, and their conflict framework falls apart.
So if you accept that, then the idea of replacing faith with science is kind of absurd. Which brings us to the final turn in our deep dive. We are moving from the fight model, the conflict, to the flight model.
The flight model, yes.
And to illustrate this cooperation, the source gives us this beautiful quote from Pope John Paul II's 1998 encyclical Fides et Ratio, which translates to faith and reason.
The central poetic image he uses in that text provides a stark contrast to everything we've discussed about the new atheists.
It's incredibly poetic. He wrote, "Faith and reason are like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth."
In that image of the two wings, the supposed conflict dissolves entirely. You cannot achieve flight with one wing fighting the other.
Right, you just spin in circles.
Exactly. They have to work in tandem, moving in the same direction, pushing against the same air to lift the organism.
The contrast in imagery is just wild. I mean, we started our timeline with the apocalyptic four horsemen bringing destruction, warning of jihads, and we end with this image of two wings working together to lift the human spirit.
And, the overarching goal of the wider project we are pulling from today is to use these historical sources to defend this exact cooperation model. The text references using biblical, patristic, scholastic, and magisterial sources.
Whoa, okay, that's a lot of syllables, just to translate that for everyone.
Yeah.
We're basically talking about the whole library of Christian history, right? The Bible, the early church fathers, that's the patristic stuff, medieval scholars, and the official teachings over the centuries.
Correct. The goal is to draw on that massive, perennial intellectual tradition to correct the persistent misconceptions of faith and reason that the new atheists managed to revive and popularize so effectively.
So, to bring this all together for you, the listener, we started our deep dive by walking back into the massive cultural storm of Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, and Dennett.
Right, the new atheists.
We explored their strict conflict model that viewed human cognition as a seesaw, pitting reason against faith. And then we unpacked the source's counter-perspective, the realization that true reason and true faith act as two wings lifting the human spirit toward truth.
We move from a paradigm of unavoidable antagonism to a paradigm of essential cognitive cooperation.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over today, building strictly on that fascinating concept that every rational inference presupposes some act of faith.
It's a great thought experiment.
It really is. I want you to look at your own life right now. Identify one purely logical or rational decision you are making today. Maybe it's a financial calculation or trusting the scientific process of the medicine you take. Challenge yourself to find the invisible foundational assumption, that hidden act of faith that makes your logic possible.
It is a profound exercise in understanding the roots of your own mind.
It changes how you see every decision you make. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning your own assumptions, keep learning, and keep looking at the world from multiple perspectives. Because as we saw today, what looks like a massive cultural war from the outside might just be two wings trying to figure out how to fly together.